I'd love it if you can just elaborate a little bit on those trends, why you think that they exist and why they're continuing to gain prevalence and become bigger and bigger things, and what that means for kind of where food is heading, in your opinion.
Totally. I love this space, obviously. And I'm a personal consumer in a definition of an omnivore too. I'll eat nearly anything, but also really love the quality of ingredients. I'll start with the organic thing. And I have learned through my career, there's a terrible amount of misinformation and misconception about it. But it's fundamentally because of how complicated it is, meaning, all crops are really treated differently. No consumer is expected to be an expert in these things. What I love about organic and what it is and where it's going is that people have this idea it's like pesticide free. No, it's just that like a whole bunch of legal but toxic pesticides and other chemicals have been screened out of the process. There are certainly, some pieces around animal husbandry, et cetera. But the bigger point is like, there's this whole class of chemicals I call legal but toxic that the industry that sells those would despise me if they're listening to this podcast for. But it's true because the science will tell you like X, Y, and Z are carcinogenic. Thankfully, the organic program strips those things out. The reasons that I think, it's not just that customers want these things, it's like they want them in quantities having never been seen before, and the most recent generations want them more than prior generations. I attribute this to transparency and spread of information and this idea that once consumers start learning that there are these legal but toxic chemicals in their very personal diet, what they're consuming, it just resonates with them. Oh, I'll spend a little bit more money to not put this in. I don't need some direct correlation of growing a second head. It's just that I believe in science and I'd rather kind of hedge on my one life. I have seen that over and over again. And then some of the customers, but not all of them in this world, they also care about the environmental benefits. Like myself, like, listen, anything I can do for the preservation of bees who are pollinating all these wonderful plants for us, like those are some other positive attributes that drive people to this. But like personal health and people's beliefs drive it all. I think it's the liberation of information that's really driven these long-term trends. And kind of flashing back to my intro, right? My dad, well, what I would call when I was 12, he was brainwashing me. But what he showed me was that consumers deserve transparency so they can make the ultimate decision. I think that really has happened with organic and putting in, you could call a catchphrase with clean label. What that's trying to encapsulate is that, and now I would have been much stubborn had we had this interview 12 years ago or something about organic, but it's like, it was much more binary about it. But I'm just like, oh, there's this whole spectrum of choices, and that set of choices is actually growing. This idea of what I call clean label, because there's not exactly a legal definition to this at this point in time, is this idea that there are actually still all these other preservatives and different additives that are legal, chemicals, that you don't really want to put in your body. And it's not that everything has to be farmed organically, and not every ingredient is, and there are problems with that. But it's like, oh, you could support this great local, you name it, XYZ producer, and be like, oh, their practices are wonderful. They're making whatever the example is, and they're taking out these unnecessary preservatives that food scientists have put into the products. A lot of the industrialization of food created this couple generations of food scientists that made it so that their job was to get humans addicted to whatever that item was, sugar, certain types of flavorings and ideas like that. And consumers aren't really having it. And I think a lot of it just has to do with they were deceived. They learned they were deceived. They're upset that they were deceived. And when given the information, they make the choice that's right for them. The last category, this idea of diet specialized, right? Because I've sold food to folks who are actually celiac, not just gluten sensitive. My last company certified gluten free. We could talk all about that if you want, but to make it safe for them to eat the products. So that's an actual need state. But there are all these other use cases, like people wanting, I've catered to the paleo diet, ketogenic diet, vegan or plant-based, however you want to say it. People say plant-based because veganism is so freaking polarized these days. It's remarkable. And those are all typically personal preferences, though a lot of the time they'll be driven by beliefs around health. And throughout my career, I've just been trying to get better at making it easier for consumers to live their aspirational lifestyle, as opposed to coming out and saying, this is good for you and this is not good for you. People making choices with the right information.